Podium is really the first and only data marketplace that we know of. Our real goal is to make data self-service on demand. And what that means is it's an end-to-end system. We go from the source systems, collect the data in a secure way, actually clean it up, and we'll spend a little bit about that. We'll do profiling, validation, apply the metadata, the rules from the governance and other teams, and then make sure that it's available to the consumers in an easy way for them to find what they're looking for, pick the right things, and know that they have trusted data to go use. We have unbelievable performance over traditional systems, productivity gains, cost cutting, all documented up on our website with a number of case studies if you're interested in the details. In 3.2, we really kind of took some of the underlying technology we had and up-leveled it one more level again. There was a whole webinar that talked about intelligent data identification and how we leverage that to do things like PII detection, clear duplicate data detection, and lots of other things that businesses can do because we find things that no one else does about the data. Second, and that's the one we're going to talk about today, Data Conductor, how we can start to help someone understand what data is available, how they want to catalog or leverage it, how they want to optimize their cost savings in their distributed storage environment, and look across the whole enterprise on the data that they want to have available to their consumers at different points of time, and we'll walk you through that. And then there will be another session later on how we've optimized to maximize or minimize costs, but maximize the environment if you decide to use an elastic cloud environment. So why Data Conductor and what is it? For most people, when they look at tools that run on the Hadoop environment, which is really the nice distributed storage environment with lots of great processing tools, they've traditionally found tools to either work within that environment or manage the data that's just within the application that's taking that part of the lake. One of the downsides of that approach is there's lots of data in many customers that the data is already in the lake, they don't want to reload it, or they have data in other sources where they don't want to load the data, but they want to expose the schema and what's available to the data consumers so that they can say, that is something I'm interested in, can you bring that in? Make sure that it's trusted, i.e. that any key things that should not be shared, like social security numbers or other things that should be obfuscated or tokenized or encrypted, are done, or whatever governance rules are applied, are added to the system, and so that they know that the data that they're getting is trusted, secure, and aligned to them, that the security issues are set up, that the rules are set up, so they're not, people on their teams are not seeing things they shouldn't be, and have access to things that they know they can go work with quickly in whether a visualization tool, analytics engine, or other downstream processes they need to use. So really what we're trying to do is really make the ability for the people that have to deliver data or process the data easy for them to go point to places, and then also decide how they want to optimize how that information is kept on the lake. So now we have a way to have data that you use constantly, managed by Podium, addressed by Podium. You can do snapshots or incremental updates. You can decide periodically that I only want to keep the profiling and certain metadata around and sample data around, or I want to point and have the schema around and then pull in the information from that source as I need it. So we kind of expanded the ability so that Podium can give a view of everything that's available, whether it's on the data lake, managed by Podium, on the data lake, or somewhere else within your environment or enterprise. So, Peter, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks. So I'm actually going to jump into the product Podium. I'm going to jump back and forth into Hue so that you can actually look at what's happening behind the scenes in Hadoop as I go through this. But if you look here, I am in our source module. And source is where we set up to onboard and do the ingestion process of data. And I have 3 different sources. In each source, I only have 1 entity, right? Defined at 3 different levels. And if you recall, John talked about managed as a level where we're actually doing the ingestion of the data and bringing it into HDFS and doing the profiling and everything to it, right? The opposite of that is addressed, where all we have is the technical metadata from the source itself. In between is this concept of registered, where you have available to you sample data and the profiling that comes out of our ingestion process, but we don't actually manage the data. We're not keeping any of that data. So we have 3 different levels here. Going back to one of the questions that came up was, do we support business names and tagging and that sort of thing? So you can see here that we may have a technical name that might be consumer UPCs, but the business name might just be UPCs, right? If you keep drilling down, this goes all the way through to the entity and to the field level. And if I look at the field level, there's a lot of business metadata here that will help me understand this. So while the technical name for the field might be volume, right? The business name might be beverage volume, usually announces with some description, an example here of the descriptions that might be in here. So from a metadata point of view, that's the kind of things that we're bringing together in terms of both the technical and the business metadata. So let's drill in a little bit farther into this idea of the managed versus addressed and registered. So for managed data, I'm going to drill into my transaction here, and I've got an entity, and this has transactional data. And if I look at my load log, I've actually loaded 411,617 records. And you'll see here, as John said, right, there were some good, bad, and ugly. But we've actually, this is Podium running the process of taking the data externally, moving it into HDFS, running it through our validation and profiling process, and then landing it and exposing it in Hive. So the outcome of that process is, here I drill down to the field level. And for each of my fields, in addition to my business and technical metadata, you'll see that we have profile information from that process, right? When we validate that data, we profile it, and we generate, 70-some individual statistics, John, around each field, such as maxes, mins, null percentages, and a host of other ones, right? So even if you didn't have business metadata, once you ingest the data, right, we're generating additional metadata, these statistics, to help you understand that. This data, because I'm in a managed data set, is now actually landed in Hadoop as actual data. So if I go back to into HDFS and I drill down to, it was my consumer transaction, that was my source. And I have an entity called transactions, and I have a single load. And that load has directories good, bad, and ugly data. And you'll see that I've actually landed data here, 18.8 megabytes of good data in there, because this is managed. Podium actually moved the data and is now putting it in a nice, clean taxonomy within HDFS. And it's also queryable within Hive, right? There's going to be data there. Whereas if I take a different entity, let's look at UPCs, right? So UPCs are registered. And if I drill down to the field level, we'll see that these have statistics around it, right? Because we've actually run it through that validation and statistical profiling process, but not landed the data. So in Hue, well, let's jump to Hive this time, right? So I'm going to query the entity of consumer UPCs. So I'm going to query this, and what we will find out is, even though I've run the process to gather the statistics, I get 0 results because there is no actual data landed here. So all that you really have is this nice, rich smart catalog that John was talking about. So how does that, what does this look like to an end user when they're trying to actually use this data? I started to build a data flow. So I'm in a module called Prepare. Prepare is where we allow users to build transformations and create new data sets based on data that's out there. And I brought in transactions and stores, and I'm going to add one more entity in here, that UPC data that I just talked about. And when I add this, and you'll see this on the right here, when I choose to add this, the first thing it's going to tell me is you've selected non-managed entities, right? Which means they'll be promoted the first time I run. So what we have currently set here for UPCs is it's registered. It's going to promote it into a managed state, which means we're going to be loading and managing that data. You'll also see here some of the nice options that we have based on that. If this were registered data, which means I didn't load the data, but I have sample data and I've got profile statistics, I could actually run this, prepared data flow just on sample data. You might want to do that anyway, right, just to test out your workflow, but that's an opportunity to not go through the process of ingesting data, but test out some of your logic as you go through. You'll see it doesn't give me that that opportunity here because I don't have that available. So I'm going to add my UPCs into my workflow here. I'm going to add them into my join, and in my UPC code, I'm going to add this here. And just a couple of quick things. Transactions. This was managed data. Managed data means I have my profile data, including data distributions. I have sample data available to me within here. And then with the stores, sorry, this little thing in the way. With the stores data, the stores was an addressed entity. That means we haven't run it. It's just technical metadata. We haven't run it through any process. There's no profile data. There's no sample data available. The UPCs were in that middle state, registered data, right? We've got profile information, data distributions, and sampling available, right? So I'm going to save this workflow, validate it, make sure that I haven't done anything stupid, and go ahead and run this. So what's happening in the background is that we are kicking off this process, but in order to kick off that process, it needs data to run it. So the first thing it's going to do is it's going to check, are all these entities in managed state? If they're not, they're going to now, in the background, promote these to a managed state. That means what's happening is it's actually kicking off, and I'll jump over to this. I'll see where we are. Hold on. Let's see where we are in my load logs. You'll see that right now it's running a load for my stores. So it's actually kicked off a process to move this into a managed state. We finished running that workflow. So what it's done is it's actually promoted those two entities that were registered and addressed, ingested them, and so they're now in a managed state, ran through the transformations and actually created a new data set out there, right? You can see the sample data based on that in my sales aggregate. And if I go in the background here and I look at that table that I previously got 0 results from, right, you can see that we've now actually ingested this data and it's available out there. So, and again, to reiterate some of the questions that came up earlier, right, this is through Hue. I'm querying this through Hive. This is not proprietary to Podium. We're getting that data prepped so that you can use your analytics tools that you're comfortable and familiar with in this environment.